on to our presentation. Wayne, I know do you have a presentation or talk? We have you first up here on the agenda, Utah Homelessness Strategic Plan and legislative funding efforts. I know Soren also shared that document with the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that, Marianne. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to try and summarize it and then open it up for questions. Happy to address any question. Obviously the Jordan River is a big attraction for people that are experiencing homelessness. And I'm going to start with a meeting that was held last fall in October, where the governor called the city, the county, and the mayors of those entities, Mayor Mendenhall, Mayor Wilson, the business community together with philanthropic community. And it was kind of a tense meeting. I happened to be out of town, thankfully. But what became of that meeting was that there would be greater enforcement of no camping in Salt Lake City and surrounding communities. And that was the commitment that was made in kind of a compact, so to speak. And so I think everybody noticed at that time that there was a lot more enforcement, at least downtown. The 5th South or 5th West Island got cleaned up. There's many parts of the city that we were used to seeing a lot of tents, people there camped that were cleaned up. Unfortunately, they just don't leave. Unfortunately, when you start to enforce, if there's no place for people to go, then they move to other areas and scatter about in maybe some smaller groups. And one of the major attractions is the Jordan River. So I'm not sure what your stats show, but you probably saw an uptick in camping along the Jordan River during that time. The statute that we passed about 2 years ago was a bill required Salt Lake County to lead a group of cities within the county to create a winter overflow plan. And for the last couple of winters, we've had more beds than we've ever had before, and more available earlier in the winter than ever before, opening up many beds as early as November 1st and even before that. And the plan this last year or this last winter was to have 600 additional beds, plus what we call Code Blue beds, an additional 200. Code Blue was another statute that the legislature passed in 2023 that is triggered by a temperature in your county of 15 degrees or below, or also if there's some extraordinary weather condition. The state Department of Health and Human Services triggers that Code Blue, and we had a lot. In Salt Lake County, I think there was like 20 to 30 Code Blue evenings last winter. And so the plan that we required of the county was to have not only winter overflow beds, but to also have Code Blue beds, which was 200. So that's a total of 800 additional beds. Our permanent beds for individuals add up to about 700. When you add in some of the more private beds, like the Salt Lake Mission and others, there are more than that. But the beds that we have in the system that we help support, there are 700 individual year-round beds. So this was more than a doubling of the beds that we were going to have available for the winter. And we just didn't pull that number out of the sky. It was based on point in time count, what we experienced in the previous winter, and other data that we have in the Office of Homeless Services. So there were nights this last winter when we had over 800 beds available for people. Additionally, in addition to the 700 beds that we have normally. And we filled all of them. All of them were full. As long as we had beds open, then there was less movement of people to other places when there was camp abatement or enforcement of no camping. And through this last winter, we proved that when the beds are available, people want to come into shelter. There are probably still a smaller population that might be resistant. But our experience over the last couple winters, when beds are available, people seek those out. Now, our winter period is from October 15th through April 30th. Through April 30th. And that's statutory. So when April 30th comes around, the winter plan ends. During the legislative session, I was saying, we're going to be releasing, over 600 people back out onto the street. Because these were 24/7, not all the beds were 24/7, but most of them were. Where people could be there 24/7. I think we only had one facility that was overnight. That was the St. Vincent's, which is 65 beds. So this was a huge deal to have that many people not camping on the street, being able to stay in the facility 24/7, 3 meals a day. We had a facility out in West Valley, and an old liquor store that the state owns. We had as many as 200 plus individuals there on some nights. And it was a big help initially. When this enforcement started, people had a place to go. And then once everything filled up, then it was more just moving people around. The idea of releasing that many people back onto the street in April was just not an option. So we've been working with the providers, with cities, to extend those beds into the summer. All but about 150 of those beds were extended. Or you would have seen a lot bigger increase in camping along the Jordan River and in all parts of the city and in the valley. Because when enforcement is really strictly, when the Salt Lake Police strictly enforce no camping, people end up in Midvale, they end up in Sandy, they end up in Davis County. In fact, we had heard a report of a council person up in Davis County who said, called up the League of Cities and Towns and said, hey, Salt Lake needs to do a better job taking care of the people experiencing homelessness, because we're seeing homeless people in our community now, which I think is an interesting comment, but that's what happens. So that's the effects of what we're doing. The positive is we're getting a lot more people off the street. But this discussion turned out to be part of what the legislature ended up helping us with as far as funding, is we've proven that we need an additional shelter. And it needs to accommodate probably 800 to 1,200 people. And so the legislature gave us $25 million one time to start locating another shelter in Salt Lake County to accommodate these numbers. And this would be a year-round facility. It would help get people off the street more permanently, off parks, off the Jordan River. So we're feverishly right now looking for a place where we could create an additional shelter facility. As you can imagine, nobody's rolling out the red carpet for us. So it'll be controversial wherever we decide to site this facility. But we're optimistic that in the next couple of months, we'll be able to find a spot. It may take a winter or so to get it all up and running. In the meantime, we still have a huge need for winter overflow beds. And we're working with Salt Lake County and the cities in Salt Lake County to come up with a plan for this winter. To keep people off the street, off the green spaces. We also received some additional funding to operate an additional facility. Unfortunately, most of that was one time, so we're going to have to go back to the legislature for ongoing operating revenue to make sure we have a sustainable system. So all in all, we were able to get about $45 million out of the legislature this year. We received housing money in time past. No housing money this year, all for shelter. That was the focus. There was also some bills passed. One of the bills that was passed changed the State Homeless Council to a state board. It's called the Homeless Services Board. And now it's at 11 members instead of almost 30 members. They had their first meeting in May. They'll be meeting on Monday again. You're welcome to join. It's a public meeting to hear what they're talking about. This meeting's agenda will be centered around what is called mitigation. So the state and the cities across the state fund a mitigation fund that goes to cities that have shelters that helps with public safety. Salt Lake, I think, got almost $3 million this last year. It's been very helpful to create a better public safety response around the resource centers, especially the Gail Miller. And so, a lot of positive things are happening. There's resources being made available, but we still have a long ways to go. Our next step is to get more beds so people have a place to go. And then there'll need to be additional resources for treatment, long-term housing, and services. So that Marianne Soren is that's a summary of what happened in this last legislative session and what we're working on right now. I will say this because this question usually comes up regarding Code Blue. Why is the temperature so low, 15 degrees? Why wouldn't it be 32 degrees or 35 degrees? Well, that was all discussed in 2023 session. Code Blue is an emergency weather condition. The winter response plan in Salt Lake County should address normal winter nights, which, average probably around 30 degrees, maybe the upper 20s. So that plan should accommodate that. The Code Blue plan is an additional plan stacked on top that addresses just the most the coolest of nights when it gets down to real critical temperature that puts people in jeopardy of losing life and limb. I want to make that a clarification and also maybe add that number was changed to 18 degrees in this last session. Happy to take any questions. Or Tricia, what did I miss? Anything that you might add to that?
Oh, I think you covered it all. I think this is a really great group and opportunity for folks to ask us any questions if you've got any.
Well, thank you so much for the overview. Do we have some questions?
I do. I'm Terry
Okay.
Marasco.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Hi. So there have been a number of police interventions on the west side, which basically, as you all know, have driven the homeless to areas like my apartment building, for example. What I haven't seen, and I'm curious if there's any coordination with any homeless service, is how the law enforcement groups are dealing with the dispersal and what the plan is, because the original plan just focused on the Jordan River. And I haven't seen anything that moves to deal with the dispersal of these homeless folks and even drug traffickers, which I've seen out of the window of my apartment.
Thank you, Terry, for the question. It's probably, I can address it like the Salt Lake PD would address it, and they're really the ones that should answer this. But since we're involved in the plan, I get to hear what is going on. Obviously, the police force is limited, and they've moved resources. The Salt Lake PD. And by the way, UHP, that's Utah Highway Patrol, has also got 11 officers now working on this project to clean up encampments. But the dispersal part of this is something that is also needing to be addressed. It goes into other cities, and their police department deal with that. How the police department is dealing that in your particular neighborhood, that's something you would have to reach out to the Salt Lake PD on. But I haven't seen Salt Lake Police Department enforce camping like they are right now. But the sad part about that, or the challenge part of that, is that they're going to end up in other places if we don't have places for people to go. So one of the major solutions is creating more spots, more beds for people to land in. And then so it's just going to take a combination of enforcement and having sufficient beds. And we're hopeful that within the next 12 months that might happen. I know that that's not addressing your issue in your neighborhood, in your apartment complex. But my advice is to be sure and reach out to Salt Lake PD when there's incidents in your neighborhood. They need to know what's going on. They may be stretched thin at certain times, but at least they still need to know what's going on so that they know how to allocate resources.
Thank you, Wayne. Todd has his hand up.
Yeah. Hey, Wayne, how would you suggest, or I don't know, this body, this committee, how could we help in this situation of migration of the homelessness? I know I represent Lehigh City, Utah County, and so I'm assuming, it's going to, through saturation, probably migrate that way. And what would your suggestion be that we could do as a technical advisory committee?
Well, the best thing we can do as a society is make sure that we have a minimal we need to have the minimum necessary, what should I say? the minimum, we need to address people's minimum needs for shelter. And so Utah County, Davis County, Salt Lake County, all need to be addressing this in their counties by providing beds, services, treatment, enforcement. They all go together, and creating the programs so that, you know, we don't have people encamped on in any place. Will it ever be perfect? Probably not, but we can address this problem in a great degree by addressing those issues. So for Utah County, you know, I think there's a lot of places in the state that think it's just a Salt Lake City problem. But when you start to talk to the people in Salt Lake, we find them from Utah County. We find them from Davis County. We find them from all over the state. They seem to be drawn here because of the services, and probably there are other things that draw them into the metropolitan city. But you're gonna face these in Lehigh and other places. Every city is a source of homelessness. People become homeless in every city in this state, but there are only a few cities that actually respond to it. Every city needs to be more responsive, prevention, making sure that their residents don't become homeless, working on ways to build resiliency in communities, and helping people before they get into homelessness in the first place. But do know that every city in every county is a source of homelessness, and everybody needs to now be involved, hopefully in preventing it first, but responding to it as far as the crisis is concerned.
Thank you. It looks like Dan has his hand up. Dan Potts?
Yeah, Wayne. So what about prioritization of abatements? You know, I use this example that, you know, you don't really see camping, homeless camping in schoolyards, elementary schoolyards or anything like that. But boy, do we see a lot of camping in, let's say, our Fife Wetland Preserve on the Jordan River. That should be the same prioritization as a schoolyard, in my opinion. I'm just the West Side. I'm the Jordan River nature guy. Sorry, so that's where I'm coming from. So, what do you got for that? Have you heard anything about prioritization of those abatements or not?
Well, you know, that gets into a lot of discussion that needs to be had with our police and local government. Salt Lake City or whatever city you live in, you know, how those things are prioritized. And that's not what we do as an office, make those priorities. But, you know, it's obvious to me, you know, where a lot of these priorities are. For the Salt Lake PD, they've been focused, you know, in the downtown area and in neighborhoods and some parks. You know, where everybody fits in that priority, I don't know. That would be a question to address with Salt Lake's Police Department.
Great. Thank you. Do we have other questions? I know I have one question, but I'll let others go first if there's more questions. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and ask mine. I appreciate how you mentioned or really stated the fact that homelessness happens in every city. You referenced that they will be looking for a site for a new shelter in Salt Lake County. Is there any thoughts of also looking in Utah County and Davis County as well to expand our shelters and support?
So some communities are unwilling to address it, and some counties, but there was statute passed, a bill in 2022 that requires Utah, maybe it's 2023, I think it was 2022, requiring Utah County, Davis County, Weber County, and Washington County. So those are what we call second-class counties. First class, there's only one first-class county, that's Salt Lake, and then second-class counties I just mentioned. That they all have a plan, and that plan is due at our office on August 1st. It also outlined that they needed to create a task force to develop a plan. So we've been part of those task force. Working towards creating additional beds through the winter. A couple of those counties are already looking at a more year-round response. And so things are happening there that haven't happened before, which is good. Washington County and Weber County already have a shelter in their communities that are operated by nonprofits. And what happens is they then become kind of the center point in those regions where people land because there's beds and services.
It's good to know. And I didn't realize the plans were due on the 1st of August. So maybe if you get an opportunity to come back and visit us again to share some updates as well, that would be great. Do we have further questions? Anybody?
I've got a couple, Marion, if
Okay.
I want to give deference to the committee first.
Of course. I don't see other hands up. So, and I've been popping back and forth to see anybody's raising a physical hand as well. So, and I do not see any. So go ahead, Soren.
Okay, thanks. Wayne, thank you so much for joining us today. And
Happy to do. Appreciate the invitation.
I know your schedule's busy. We've got a lot of communities represented on this technical advisory committee that have homeless resource centers, particularly South Salt Lake and Midvale, Salt Lake City. And so I know this is welcome information for many of those that are kind of working at the forefront around homeless services. The question that I have is the same one that I posed in the Gardner Policy Institute meeting last week. But I think it would be helpful to maybe hear some of that discussion here. Just over a year ago, the State Homelessness Council adopted a strategic plan. I thought it was a really remarkable document. I was serving on the Salt Lake Valley Coalition Steering Committee at the time, so we had a lot of opportunity for input and providing feedback on that plan. And I thought it was really remarkable. It's only been, 2 years since we developed the State Homelessness Coordinating Office, which you lead, and Tricia serves as your deputy. And I think it's really pretty remarkable to see this coordinated approach as a state. I thought it was really exemplary that right after this homelessness strategic plan was completed, that there was a recommendation for funding to implement that plan that was presented as part of the governor's budget and fully fund that. I was discouraged that at the end of the legislative session, less than a third of the funding that was requested was actually appropriated. And so the question, and I know you're grappling with this right now, if we're not funding the implementation strategies of that strategic plan, how on earth do we implement a plan when we have so little of the funding available to do that work? And I'd love to just hear how you're grappling with that and, maybe what other things we can do to help advocate and support those efforts and support you and your team and the communities that are working on the front lines.
Thank you, Soren, for that. So there are really 4 main categories of the state plan for homelessness: housing, services, coordination, and prevention. So there are a number of items within the strategic plan that have been going well. we really made some big progress on housing when the legislature funded us housing money in 2023 and 2022. We had over $100 million. And there's, 1,700 units of deeply affordable housing that wouldn't exist if we didn't have that money. Not all of them exist yet, but by into next year, if we could keep that going on an ongoing basis, because our goal isn't to put people into shelter. Shelter is a crisis emergency situation, and people should be there, in my opinion, less than 90 days. And that there needs to be capacity and anticipated so that when somebody comes into shelter, they're not having to be there for years to be able to access services and housing and what is needed. So, that is where we really are going to bump up against any real progress in this is having those needed resources, as you articulated, when somebody comes into shelter, their situation is assessed. We align their needs with what capacity is out there, but you need that capacity to really address homelessness. And if we were functioning like that, we'd be able to close down shelter. We wouldn't need the amount of shelter we have today because we're getting them to what we ultimately want people to be in, and that's in a housing situation. So we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars for the housing component on this. But we're making quite a bit of progress working with Salt Lake County and other counties on getting the services improved, the resources being available. You got the receiving center coming online in Salt Lake County here towards the end of this year, the first of next. It'll be a big help. This youth crisis center in Taylorsville was just announced by, I think it was IHC. These kind of responses are going to be huge for us in prevention and addressing people that are vulnerable or in a crisis homeless situation. But you hit it right on the nail. It's going to take resources, and we did have some success this session. You never get everything you want, but we will be advocating continually for additional funds for housing and services. That is our strategy. That's what we know works, and that's what we'll be pursuing.
Thank you, Wayne. That's great to hear that perspective. And I might just follow up with a quick note to a point you made earlier. I participate regularly in the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness meetings, as well as the Continuum of Care, which is kind of an equivalent program for Utah, Wasatch, and Summit counties. And obviously, a lot of the focus is on Utah County right now. And it was interesting in one of their recent meetings, there was a comment somebody made, aren't we happy we don't have the same challenges that Salt Lake County has? And yet we know from surveys and information that's gathered that many people from Utah County end up in Salt Lake County. And so it exacerbates the problems here in Salt Lake County. So Todd, to your question, if there's an opportunity, we'd love to come and maybe meet with your city council and mayor and others to talk about things that Lehigh City could do. We're just starting to see, for the first time I can recall, some homeless encampments in Lehigh and Saratoga Springs. They're, of course, the fastest growing cities in the state. And, both of them, we were on a tour of the Jordan River last week and saw a couple of encampments in Lehigh that we haven't seen really before about a year ago. And I suspect we'll see those grow. You know, that's what Salt Lake County looked like around the Jordan River 15 years ago. And so it's concerning to see that that homeless encampment expanding into Utah County around the Jordan River. So lots of work to do. We're a resource and a support for your efforts. And if there's things we can do to help advocate for those funding resources, we would love to support that.
Thank you.
Well, any further questions? These are all great questions. And again, I appreciate very much you joining us today and sharing all the great work that you're doing and your office is doing and the various cities and counties. So I can
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care and hopefully we can have you back again.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.